everyone, and welcome to Celebrating Cinema, a podcast for the love of cinema. I'm your host, Laura Gommans. If you love what we do, please show your support by leaving us a review. It really helps us to keep making this podcast. Some fun things happening at Lab 111 in Amsterdam this month. We have a retrospective of French filmmaker and eternal icon Agnès Varda, with an episode coming out next week on her life as a filmmaker. Our monthly Celebrating Cinema Film Club is back on the 11th of September with a screening of the cult classic Charlie's Angels to coincide with an upcoming episode about the art of a great chick flick. Today, our producer Elliot Bloom talks to Iranian filmmaker Sepideh Farsi about her latest film, Put Your Soul on Your Hand and Walk.
Where are you now?
I'm in Gaza. This is my neighborhood. No one live here or there or there. There's no one.
It's Sepideh's response to the ongoing massacre of the Palestinians. It documents Sepideh's friendship with Palestinian photographer Fatima Hassouna, a 24-year-old woman living in Gaza, surviving under Israel's relentless bombs and documenting the war. Through Zoom calls, Sepideh learns more about Fatima's life. This film and this conversation remind us how important cinema is in times of crisis and during these unimaginable world events. When media refuses to platform Palestinians living through a genocide, cinema can be a platform for those voices, until they are silenced completely, because Fatima is no longer with us. She was murdered during an Israeli attack on her home the day after it was publicly announced that this film was selected for Cannes. Here's Elliot and Sepideh.
Sepideh, welcome.
Hello, Elliot. Thank you.
Of course, we're going to speak about your film, Put Your Soul on Your Hand and Walk, which I really can't wait to discuss. But first, we always ask our guests, what was your first memory of cinema?
It must be, I don't know, one of the films I saw when I was very young. I first started with animation films. My mom used to take me to Tehran Film Festival to watch animation films. Must have been 7 or something. It was Eastern European, animation films, quite eclectic, and those are the first films that I remember.
From animation, because I know you've also made an animation film yourself, but what was sort of the path for you to becoming a filmmaker? Because like you mentioned, you're from Iran, and I think some of your films explore both your experience living in Iran and your relationship with the regime there.
Well, that happened much later. I was interested in different aspects of arts that are involved in cinema, namely writing, music, and then later on photography. And that's what led me to, when I was 16, I wanted to do a photography course to learn more about photos. I was already taking, but I wanted to improve my technology, or technical, how do you say, knowledge. And then it ended up being a film analysis course where we had no access to films because it was during the Cultural Revolution. So we were told the films. Our professor would play or tell us the films as classics and draw them on a blackboard, but we couldn't see them, watch them. This was my first real contact with the cinema, and I really fell in love. And I was like, I have to see these films, and I want to make films, So and then I was 16, but it took me a few years before I really could get started.
That must be a strange experience of being told a film and drawn it and then later watching it. And how do those two experiences compare? Or
Yeah, it's like being in a black room, and listening to something that you will see later on. Told me about Bergman films, about Citizen Kane, about Antonioni's. It is indeed a very intense experience because the frames that you're told about and that people draw for you and explain, when you watch them, it's really, very impacting.
and is there a film that has perhaps shaped the way you think about cinema or that still sticks with you from your early years?
Well, yes, Costa Gavras's films were films that I saw, and they really did. They were shown regularly on the Iranian TV back then, like Zed, The Trial, and then it's another age for me. I was, still like, I don't know, feeding on. I wasn't having an analytical. But those are the films that I remember. Also, the Battle of Algiers. Corvo. Those are the films that all the Eastern European, some Russian films, Desica's film, for instance. Those were the films that were accessible on the post-revolutionary Iranian. But also, I don't know, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. I mean, because the films were good. They were not propaganda films, but they were films that were approved by the standards of the revolutionary or art. Yeah, well, when I arrived in Paris at the age of, well, 18, then I really, discovered so many.
I would now like to talk about the film you made, Put Your Soul on Your Hand and Walk. And I want to start. This is probably a very obvious question, but I think the lack of films about what is happening in Palestine is kind of why I asked this. But what made you want to make a film about the genocide taking place in Gaza?
Precisely that lack, not only in cinema, but also in the media generally. I had the feeling that there was something very strange happening. There was the point of view, the anchor of the narratives that I was hearing was very unbalanced. Where you feel that there's something missing in the puzzle. They were talking, of course, about October 7th, obviously, about the horrible attacks that happened then and the retaliation of Israel. But we had the American point of view, the Israeli point of view, the European point of view, the British, the Egyptian. Where were the Palestinians? They were not there. Nobody was asking about them, from them, what they felt, how they were surviving, why did this thing happen. And it was also as though nothing had existed in Palestine prior to October 7th. Everything started. Like all of a sudden, the door opened and the horror of October 7th. No, it wasn't like that, obviously. As horrible as October 7th is, and as traumatic, there were many decades of history behind or before that that led to that event. And so these things, and the fact that the Palestinians were just not there, simply not there, it really became obsessional to me, for me. And so I decided to go closer to the conflict zone, hoping to be able to pass naively. I thought, well, I'm an Iranian, I will be able to cross. And well, of course, I wasn't able to cross. Obviously, everybody was blocked already back then, as bad as it is today, and the killings of the journalists were already ongoing. So I couldn't make it to the other side, but I was with Palestinians in Cairo, the refugees who'd just arrived from Gaza. And this is how it started, from my personal need to understand, actually. And then, of course, to share it with the world, because that's how I make films. I mean, that's why we make films. We first address something that is very crucial for us as filmmakers, and then we share it with the world. So that's how it started. And then one of the my frustration was that I wanted somebody from inside Gaza. One of the people I was following, he told me, I have this friend who's still there in North Gaza, and she's a great person, and she's a photographer. She's very talented, and just the description he had of Fatma was amazing. And I said, of course, yes, I want to meet her, and that's how it started. So he put us in touch, and then it's the beginning of the film already.
And for context, this is Fatima Hassouna, who at the time that you are introduced to her, she's 24, like you say, a Palestinian photographer. Could you perhaps share about your experience of meeting her and also about your relationship? Because you form a very strong relationship, I think a lot stronger than anyone could expect as a filmmaker might in this situation. And yeah, how she is as a person, because it is captured in the film, but I think it's good also to hear your experience of meeting Fatma.
Yes, something extraordinary happened, something unusual, very special. That thing, which is quite hard to describe, perhaps. I don't know. I guess one would have to watch the film to understand what it means as a bonding. It's a very immediate bonding that happens between us, kind of a friendship, sorority. I don't know, some a very strong relationship, and it's immediate and it's mutual. I think, and I guess it's because of who I was and who she was, both facing each other in relation one to the other. This was why it happened that way, meaning that I guess I could relate to what it meant to be locked up in a place, not being able to leave, your country, because I was in that position years ago, decades ago, but still I know what it meant, wanting to travel but not being able to travel. Before I was able to leave Iran, I went to jail and I was blacklisted and I could not leave my country. And again later on, I was stuck one more time in the 80s. And also, I know that feeling, locked in a place, stuck in a place. You don't. The difference was that Fatim, I called her Fatim. That was the name close friends called her, and she signed her poetry by that name. Fatim was adamant to stay in Gaza, but she also wanted to travel, and she kept saying that I would love to, as soon as the war is over and when I can, leave Gaza, but always to go back. So this feeling of me also not being able to go back to Iran, it's also another particularity of my life. That is, I've been outside Iran for 16 years without being able to go back, or if I do go, I will be arrested. So I mean, all these things, and the fact that I started with photography when I was younger. That's how I started, for cinema. All of these, I guess, to for this relationship to form very quickly, instantly, as soon as we were in touch. And you see it in the film. You see it in the image. That's also why I decided to put it without almost any preliminary. I mean, there are a few images before, but we just start on that.
We'll speak more about Fatima in a minute, but you also ask very direct questions, questions that we're all thinking here in a safe space of how it is to live there. What are they doing for food? Is their water contaminated? All these kind of things. But it was there. I can imagine it also must be quite difficult to ask these questions because perhaps you don't want to remind them of the situation they're in because of your own guilt, maybe for being in a safe place. I don't know if that was something you wrestled with.
No, absolutely. I did tell her, and I asked her often, or I expressed my guilt, my feeling of awkwardness of being in a safe place, having, and it's still there. Even now that she's gone. I mean, regarding the whole situation in Gaza, I was just writing about it in an article, that I think the horror of it is that we are being forced to accepting this combination of having access to food, eating, first feeling guilty, watching these kids dying of starvation in Gaza, and then gradually getting used to seeing these little creatures that are starving in front of our eyes, and then little by little it becomes, it will not become banal, of course, because it's so horrible, but I think the Israeli occupation and the new order of the world, and America is in it, and all those countries who are complicit in this genocide are part of it, or at least the leadership, the political leadership. I'm not
Yes.
going to have people, because people are different, but those who are complicit, they want us to get used to this. They want us to become silent, to become numb, to accept this as a fact of watching them starve to death, and then live our lives. And I hope that it won't happen. But it is such a horrible thing. It is already in itself, it's traumatic. When I compare the situation now to when I was filming Fatem, it was almost for a full year, from April 24 to 25, when she was killed. It was already horrible, but much better, or less worse than what we are facing now. Which makes me think how far or how deep the horror can be. Because every week I would think, oh, it can't get worse. It can, or she would say, or we would think, the world would think, it can't get worse than this. It has to get better. But it kept getting worse and worse and worse, and it still is. We haven't reached the end of it. The decision that I made, to come back to your question, I'm sorry. My decision was to be honest about my guilt, be honest about my curiosity, to be transparent, let's say. That if I felt that something was important to be asked, I wouldn't be, going about it. I would ask the question directly.
In the film, you also speak with Fatma about how this isn't normal, even though there is a sense of it feeling normal. And I think this is also something we experience ourselves, and what you're talking about, that we're being conditioned to have to continue living our lives as we do, and go to work, eat, sleep, see friends, but still with this almost in the background of something that we are told we can't change. And I think the fact just by asking these questions directly, you sort of bridge that distance for at least us as an audience to understand at least a little bit of what it is like for people living in Gaza right now or back then, a year ago. And I think that also leads me to my next question about how you decided to film this. This for me very much feels as a cinema, as a means of necessity. This isn't a typical film. You take away all the drama from it as well, I think at times. I think the drama is already implied with what we see, but you also shoot it all on an iPhone, I'm pretty sure, and you use pixelated images rather than actual news footage. And I wanted to know what your intention is with this, because we're already very used to these kind of images. So you could be forgiven if you wanted to even emphasize the drama by perhaps giving us a different way of seeing what we're seeing.
I decided, yes, instantly, and it was very instinctive, that the image quality should be low key. I did not want, I avoided the high tech and high resolution image on purpose to make it closer to something more personal, more human, less perfect. The imperfection of the image and the sound is linked also to the difficulties of connection and the disconnection that we kept living through. And this is also part of their life and our sharing their life or their trauma, because the connection that is denied to them constantly is also part of their condition. And I wanted the audience to feel that with me. So, I mean, I put my curiosity, my guilt, my anxiety of losing her, my frustration of getting disconnected, all of that in the film in a very transparent way, so as to share it as much as possible with the audience, to convey the same feeling I had to the audience who's watching the film, to bring them as close as possible to Gaza and to Fatima.
I'm just thinking now of also the kind of absurdity of being able to FaceTime and speak to someone who is literally living through a genocide, of the fact that you have that kind of first hand contact with someone, something we've never had before.
No. Well, we did as Iranians. I don't know if you remember that. Not exactly genocide, because it wasn't a genocide, but it was killings, mass killings in Iran in 2009. I remember exactly that when the Green Movement happened, and it is at the end of other film that I made with a mobile phone, which is called Tehran Without Permission, in 2009 and 2008 and 9. It was filmed, and then it was, and then I mean, at those moments, we could almost in real time, almost watch people being shot. I mean, Neda Agha Sultan is a young woman who was killed while she was rallying, protesting in
Mm.
on the streets of Tehran. There were three or four people or more probably who filmed her dying, and it was instantly put on the social media. And I received it, I don't know, I guess very quickly afterwards, like just like a few minutes. I know what it means. It's almost, and now it's even more. There's even more immediacy because the image is so quickly. I've already been through that trauma of seeing somebody falling down and dying in front of our eyes, shot dead in Iran by the Iranian regime, the same Iranian regime which is pretending to defend the Palestine. That's how absurd it is all. It is very eerie to be talking to somebody who has an explosion in the background, and then, as we see, or he tells you, yes, this morning they killed my neighbors, and you're like, what? It's so strange. It's hard to imagine how lively she is, and how smiling. I mean,
Yes, it's very clear what an incredible person Fatima is, and I don't think that is simply because she is Palestinian, what she's living through. Of course, that adds to it, but just her as a person, she is quite remarkable, and I think you captured that very well in the film. And I think a lot of that is her optimism. Yeah, she's always smiling, often. But then I think what's clear in the film, as you come to the end of the film, there is quite a significant change in Fatima. Not necessarily the core of her, but you see the toll of the mental side of seeing relatives or friends dying. She describes very graphically the things that she sees, but also how starvation is weaponized and her being hungry and that taking the hope from her. And I think you comment on it in the film. And I think what's interesting also is in the film, you're maybe a bit more pessimistic or less hopeful at the start, and it's her that's perhaps more hopeful. And then you're almost by the end encouraging her to remain hopeful because that is all we have.
Yes, exactly. We kind of went on opposite curves in a way. When I started filming her and our conversations, let's say in late April 2024, not that I was pessimistic, but I was perhaps, how do I désabusé? I was more
Disillusion.
disillusioned than her. Yes, exactly. First of all, I was outside. I had a broader vision of things because they have access to very narrow current of information. Not that what we get here is always very objective, because obviously there is a problem here as well. But still, we have more resources here. She was so more than resilient. She was combative. She was very full of energy. Yes, proud, as she said, to be a Palestinian in Gaza, and all that she describes. And also her belief, her faith, her religious faith. Not that it's unknown to me, because I do come from a country where many people are believers, but I'm very far from that myself and have been for a long time. So I am very skeptical generally. And I told her that also very openly. I felt that it was important for me to not to pretend. She was the one who was very combative and very full of energy. And I was welcoming that energy, and I was curious to learn about how she, of that mode she was in. And it was fascinating for me. And then gradually, exactly, the depression comes, the war settles in, her energy is lower, the food is lacking. And that's where you see that before even this final stage of genocide and starvation, through not only but mainly now through starvation and mass killings, even then it was already ongoing. And that's when you see the effect on a very healthy and normal and very energetic and very special person. Even a person like her, by not having the normal food, at some point you kind of start losing your sharpness. I mean, we miss one meal and we're like not feeling good, it's crazy. You have to imagine people who have missed many, many meals for many days and weeks and months in a row. Was already there, and the world was not acknowledging. And this is the crazy thing. By which time I do realize that she's kind of on the downhill slope, and I, of course, as a friend, try to just relativize things and create hope for her.
The other thing that comes across in this film is you showcase a lot of Fatma's photographs, and they aren't just photographs. I think they're very phenomenal. They capture both how she sees the world around her in, I think, quite a unique way. I think it's very easy, perhaps, to just show devastation and the pain with which that country is enduring, but she still manages to capture the lighter moments or the sense of solidarity or something that I perhaps don't have the words to put together. But I don't know if you also had that experience of looking at her photos.
Yes, yes, she had a combination, a very unique combination, I would say, perhaps in the later moments or years of Palestinian photographers documenting war and destruction. She had this combination of rigor, of a very sharp eye gaze, and something very tender that was tuned towards life, all the while documenting the destruction and the genocide, but not in a very graphic way. Also, she always had this way of keeping distance, and also like very architectural in her way of framing the destruction, the herbicide. The other characteristic of this present phase of genocide, it's not the first time I think it has happened in Gaza, because Gaza has been destroyed many a times. But this is one of the most devastating chapters of it, I think, because when you watch her photos, you realize how systematic the destruction is. You always felt people had a lot of dignity in her photos.
Yes.
This is the unique thing about her.
Yeah, I think you've captured it very well. I think, as you said, Fatma is no longer with us. And as you point out in interviews, it's no coincidence that the moment that it's announced publicly this film would be screened at Cannes, the very next day, I believe her entire family, except for her mother, maybe, were murdered by Israel. And this isn't uncommon, actually. I wondered what it says of how filmmakers have been targeted, of course, journalists as well, but you also have With No Other Land, it won an Oscar. As soon as the filmmakers came back, one was taken away, imprisoned, tortured, and I believe one of them was also later killed by a settler as well.
From what I see with the distance, general will of the Israeli occupation. I don't know how exactly to qualify it. I mean, whether it's not only Netanyahu, it cannot be only him or only his ministers and governments, or not only Smotrich and Ben Gvir and Netanyahu. Three people cannot do this. There's a much bigger movement behind this. Whoever is guiding and making the decisions for this kind of actions, they are doing several things. Well, there's a systematic attack on schools, hospitals, artists. In the artist category, you have the photographers, the filmmakers, the writers. Imagine, I mean, and this is not new. When you Kanafani, the poet, was killed in the 70s by Mossad. And there are many others. It's just like Darwish is one of the very few Palestinian poets who lived till he died, unfortunately, by a disease, but uh, many of them were taken. Rafat El Arir was killed in December 2023. He was a poet. He was targeted. It was not just like a random bombing. He was targeted. So was Fatem. And yes, the only survivor is her mother. The rest of the family perished, were killed in that targeted attack. And I want to mention the forensic architecture report on her case, which is public. You can find it there on their site. It was published in May, but just a month about after her killing. They really detail the modus operandi and the way a drone launched missiles on her house. It was really a clear target because she was a photojournalist, or because she had done the film, or both. It's difficult for me to. The fact is that it was just one day after the announce of the selection. It is killing intellectuals, killing artists, killing ways of people who claim the Palestinian identity. Perhaps they believe that by killing these people, the cultural identity will disappear. But I think they're wrong, because it makes it all the most stronger. You eliminate them, but their words, their photos, their message is there.
And I think maybe to zoom out, it's quite clear the fear of the power that art can have and cinema. I think the reason why people make films is also perhaps why you make films as well, is to convey what is happening or trying to make sense of what is happening in the world and giving our perspective of it. And so you would think in a time like we live in today, not only with the genocide, but also the invasion of Ukraine, the rise of fascism, that cinema would be able to address this or try to make sense or in some way respond to it in ways that we have seen cinema respond to it in previous decades. But for me, there's clearly a lack of it. Clearly a fear to talk or for whatever reason. And I think I wanted to know why you think perhaps filmmakers are shying away from trying to come to terms with the really important things that matter right now.
You mentioned something in your early questions, and I didn't really expand on that term, cinema of emergency. And this is clearly a case of a cinema of emergency. I think it is a matter of personal choice. Cinema is a very odd thing. It's kind of it can get you drunk in the sense of, because of the power it has as a filmmaker and as a viewer also. You can really get carried away by the power of the images. So it is very comfortable, of course, to as much as it is difficult to find the money, the funds, and all to make films because it is a very costly art, it is also possible to do it with very minimal means. And this is what I did. It is a choice. And it comes to the moment where you think, as a filmmaker or as a person, that it is an emergency and you have to do something quickly and you have no time to work on the concept and look for fundings and this and that. And I mean, then of course, films like this would never come to be. Commissions would refuse it, or it would take too long. I think cinema has both powers: the power of putting you to sleep as a viewer, because it is also entertainment. It has a great power to carry your mind away, to and make you feel relaxed and forget about your problems. It has that power. It also has the power of bringing you close to people who are far from you, and you can have a lot of empathy. This is what I felt what I was doing the film, and this is what I tried to convey with the film.
And I think if I can add to that, I actually read, so the title of the film appears right at the end, and it's "Put Your Soul on Your Hand and Walk," and it comes from a conversation you had with Fatma, where she says every time she walks in the streets, this is the feeling that she has. And I actually read it by the end as a call to action for us in safer places, where when we walk on the streets, we don't have that same feeling, but to almost seek that feeling, to actually risk something and put our hearts on the line and fight. So that's, I think, perhaps a testament to the film that you've made, Sepideh. And I only want to end by asking, and I think I can ask this question because you say in the film, without hope, we have nothing. What are your hopes for the future? I mean, some are very obvious, but perhaps there's something more personal as well.
I am quite skeptical at this moment, sincerely, and I don't want to hide it. I really, when I left Iran and came to Europe, perhaps I was illusioned. I thought certain things would not happen. We would not have fascism again. These things that back in the 80s, the 70s, after the Second World War, certain things seemed avoidable and impossible to occur again. But I think world has proved wrong, and we are seeing terrible things happening, and I think we really have to be conscious of the fact that everything is possible and we can lose everything, and it is and fight for it. Acknowledge that a freedom of speech and freedom generally is very fragile and can be taken away if you're not conscious, and we are being controlled more than ever. I mean, because of the technology, we have access to things, but we're also controlled. So my hope is, if I would have, yes, that we go through this, and we come out of this very dark moment of our history, without letting down people. That we really manage to make a shift, to make changes, because if we lose this, if we let this happen till the end, this is really very bad, not only for Palestinians, but for all of us. This is a very dangerous precedent, historical precedent. As people who care, I think, no matter if we're filmmakers or just, as citizens, world citizens, we really have to, and I hope we can manage. I hope we can manage to show the leadership that they cannot just, take us with them in this genocidal moment. And it's not only in Palestine, it's all over the world. I think we have to put these in relation together in a broader perspective. And what is going on in Palestine, if we don't stop it, will happen elsewhere and in a world that would not be worth it living. So I really hope we can overcome.
If we take anything from these last few years, is that we have to fight more than we have and more than we are now. Otherwise, we will continue to let things happen. And I think hopefully it really, people can wake up or really be compelled to actually do something. Although there aren't the answers right now of what that looks like, I think just by starting and coming together is all you can do to begin with. Lastly, all I want to say is I think one day when we'll look back through history, I think these will be one of the films that we look back to make sense of this time. I really believe that, along with No Other Land. I think this is going to be a very important film historically. And I think it's incredible that you made this along with Fatma. I think simply sharing her story should give anybody a sense of hope. Thank you.
Thank you for your words, and I really hope that, and I believe that she's still there. You know, of course she's gone. I know that, but somehow I can't believe that, and I feel that her energy is there. Might sound simplistic, but I do believe that her the core of her energy and her message of what she wanted to convey is going around the world now. I'm happy at least for that. I mean, that is a meager but some consolation.
If you haven't seen Put Your Soul on Your Hand and Walk, I'm sure after listening to this, you feel compelled to go. You can get tickets at lab111.nl or via the link in the show notes. Stay connected with us at Celebrating Cinema and Lab by following at Lab111 on Instagram and Letterboxd. If you love what we do, support us by leaving a review on your favorite podcast platform. It really helps us climb the ranks of the podcast charts. And don't forget to check the show notes for all the films mentioned, bonus info, and ticket links. This was a Lab 111 production, edited and produced by Elliot Bloom with music from Hugo Emertzal and artwork from Studio FFF.